Hello, I'm Julie Smith, Potter County Clerk, and you're listening to Texas County Voice, a podcast for all 254 counties. Thank you for listening.
Welcome to a new episode of Texas County Voice. I'm Jody Seaborn with the Texas Association of Counties, and today I have with me Zelma Smith. Zelma is the Senior Fiscal Policy Analyst in our Legislative Services Department. Anyone who regularly attends our Tuesday morning breakfast legislative briefings knows Zelma from her budget updates, her work in County Magazine, and our County Issues newsletter. Welcome, Zelma. It's great to have you here.
Thanks, Jody. Great to be here.
So, Zelma, let's begin. Just tell us a little bit about yourself. Give us a little bit about your background.
Jody, I started at, I've worked mostly in public service. I've worked at local government, city, and county government. But for the most part, I've worked at a place called the Texas Legislative Budget Board. I worked there as an analyst and a manager for many years. That Legislative Budget Board, as people in Texas know, basically works with both the Senate and the House to develop budget recommendations for the state of Texas. Anyway, I was there for quite a while. So that's my background, and I came here to TAC, I guess it's been a little over 5 years, and I've been working with legislative services on, monitoring the budget, working on fiscal notes, and also helping identify grant opportunities for which counties are eligible.
Well, we're here to briefly discuss, give an overview of the state budget for the next biennium. That would be for the 2026 and 2027 fiscal years. And the House and the Senate have both filed their baseline budgets. And let's start there.
Well, the nice thing, Jody, is, I guess as a starting point from a county perspective, is that these two budgets are pretty similar. They're both around, and all funds around $35 billion. I mean, those are huge numbers, but consider that's over a 2-year period. I think, again, just looking at it from like a county official would, first, they continued funding for pay raises for community supervision and corrections department staff. There were 5% pay raises allotted for those people in last year's budget or in the current budget, and they've continued funding those. The same thing applies for juvenile probation department staff. And those folks are county employees, but their salaries come through the state budget. So these are good things, I think, from a county perspective. The other thing that I think county officials can feel good about is there being a consensus around additional funding to address Texas's water infrastructure needs. The House bill actually includes $2.5 billion for water infrastructure needs. Now, that's contingent on legislation. The Senate bill, on the other hand, doesn't include any specific funding, but I guess a promise in the form of an intent rider, whereby they're saying we're going to include funding for water infrastructure in the supplemental appropriations bill. Now, the legislature passes a budget bill for the next 2 years, but they also take a look at, hey, how are we doing in this current budget cycle? Where are the savings? Where are the cost overruns? Let's level this out. So they do that through the supplemental appropriations bill. And what the Senate's 2627 bill says in an intent rider is that they're going to provide funding for water infrastructure needs in the supplemental bill.
That's a good thing to point out. It can get confusing because
Tell me about it.
Fiscal years don't match calendar years.
No, nor do they match county budget years, okay?
Right. So we're currently in the 2024-25 budget.
That's right.
Which ends August 31st.
20
this year, 2025.
That's right.
All right, so that's a little bit of clarity there. One thing that listeners may hear as we discuss the budget is the terms all funds and general revenue funds. Do you want to briefly tell us what those mean?
You know, this is a great question. What's meant by all funds is every penny that's in the budget. So, like, if you're for counties, I guess property tax levy, right? That's like general fund. Okay. For the state, it's general revenue fund is their kind of discretionary fund, where taxes, fees, other things. Sales taxes primarily, in fact. That's the big revenue source. And then also within that all funds number, you've got something called general revenue dedicated funds, and that's going to be funds that are collected and dedicated for a specific purpose. For the most part, those aren't tax. They're not taxes. They're fees. But so those are called general revenue dedicated funds. An example of that would be the Fair Defense account, which is dedicated to funding indigent defense. The other thing that you'll see in that all funds number is federal funds, any kind of federal receipts that we receive, federal grant funds we receive from D.C. So you'll see
any kind of federal grant or
any
federal
kind of
money
federal grant, any kind of federal grant
that comes from Washington D.C. to the states.
That's right. That's right. Fair game. And then there are other state funds, state highway fund, for example.
So not to just in case any of those terms pop up during this conversation, our focus is going to be on what is in the Senate's baseline budget and the House's baseline budget that is of interest to counties, some of those highlights.
Yeah.
So the Senate Finance Committee, we're recording this on Wednesday morning, February 5th. The Senate Finance Committee began hearings on the budget last week. Those are continuing. The House has yet to hold its hearings because the House has yet to form its committees, but we're expecting those announcements, this week? And then once those House committees are formed, then the House Budget Committee, the House Appropriations Committee will begin work on its version of the budget. That's right. So that's kind of where we stand at the moment.
Yeah, that's a nice recap. Let me just say that at the Senate Finance Committee hearings, we've heard a lot about some of the issues that counties really care about. We got some testimony about indigent defense, which is something counties are required.
Big issue for counties.
Huge issue for counties. Very, very expensive issue for counties too, and something that that's a true mandate. It's
it's constitutional.
Constantly required. Exactly. So the reason why this budget cycle is even more important for indigent defense is because the agency is going through is experiencing a revenue shortfall in its dedicated funding source. It looks to be that funding source isn't sustainable over time. So what the agency is doing is asking for, what the commission is doing, I should say, is asking for a pretty big additional funding just to address that shortfall. I believe it's about 10 to 12 million just for that. They're also looking to provide counties with opportunities to look at more cost-effective public defense models, right? One of the things that counties and the commission have found to be pretty economical is public defender offices. So one of the commission's big ask is $35 million just to provide opportunities for counties, large and small, to actually try those models out, to actually receive funding for that kind of a model, for these public defender models. There are some other things that the commission is asking for to address attorney shortages in rural parts of the state. And again, these are all things that aren't included in either version of the budget yet. These 2 or 3 things I'm mentioning now, that county officials will need to monitor, and we'll certainly be monitoring it on their behalf to see what the legislature does to kind of deal with this issue. It's certainly getting a lot of attention.
So what are some headline items that have appeared so far before the Senate Finance Committee that counties would be interested in?
I think there was a pretty big discussion around how much funding is provided for what's called the Disabled Veterans Tax Relief Program. If there's an exemption, a property tax exemption for disabled veterans and their widows, actually. And if you live in a community that has a great number of veterans that qualify for the exemption, then it tends to kind of bites into your tax base a bit. And there's a program that basically provides relief to counties and other affected communities to reimburse them for the impact of this relief. So the discussion centered around how much funding is in the current bill for it and the introduced bills for it. It's like $19 million only. What's interesting is that the Comptroller of Public Accounts, who administers the program, was asking for, a pretty significant increase there, an additional $50 million, taking it to, a total of $69 million for this program. Part of it to play catch up to recover at least a portion of that relief, or a greater proportion of that relief. So that's something that I think there is a lot of discussion about at Senate Finance. I think that's an issue that the committee is actively looking at, and perhaps considering providing additional funding for, or at least more clarity or transparency around what the real needs are there. So I know that'll be of interest to some of our counties that aren't currently participating in that program. I think the other thing that there's always interest in the governor's budget because, and they did discuss the governor's budget. There's always interest in the governor's budget because it includes significant grant funding that flows to counties. There's about $500 to $600 million of grant funds that flows through the governor's office that the counties, some of which counties are eligible for. And that's for things like, funding for cybersecurity grants.
Operation Lone Star.
Operation Lone Star, exactly.
The Governor's Border Security.
The Governor's Border Security Initiative. There's about $100 million in the budget just for local border security grants to counties. There's also funding in the governor's office for border prosecution unit, for example. There's also funding for things like bullet-resistant vests, other kind of law enforcement needs are addressed there or partially addressed there. So that's another area that I think counties are going to be, where counties are pretty interested in. And for the most part, we're not seeing any changes in the current funding levels. So for the most part, it's good news. Now there was a decrease in funding for body-worn cameras that counties might need to be aware of. The current funding is at $10 million for the biennium, and it was basically cut in half. Now, on the flip side of that, there's a big increase in funding for anti-gang programs, and again, these are programs that counties can apply for funding for. And also, in terms of this anti-gang program, the increase there was tied to a lot of the activity there is tied to border security as well. So there was a pretty sizable shift there in funding. Now I think the total amount available for that is $69 million. So it's pretty big swing from where it was at. Previously we were going from like $16 million to $69 million. One of the things that counties do to address various issues, mental health issues, so it's to create specialty courts. It's part of their effort to divert people out of people with mental health issues or substance abuse issues out of county jails. And there's funding here for specialty courts. That funding is level. It's about at $24 million. Anyway, those are just some of the things that I think the governor's office provides funding for. That Senate Finance has already talked about. I guess the only other thing I'd mention in terms of governor's office funding is there's a pretty good size increase in funding for peace officer mental health program, which might be of interest to county officials. The Senate, both the Senate and the House bills include a 15% pay raise for judges. Now, there's some strings attached to that that involve accountability and time management. The thing about that 15% salary increase is that it's statutorily by law, any increase in the district judge pay is linked to the salaries of prosecutors, district attorneys,
So
and
district attorneys.
prosecutors, and what have you, and also salary supplements for our constitutional county judges are linked to that. Right now, county constitutional judges are eligible to receive a salary supplement of $25,200 a year. So I know that our Texas District and County Attorneys Association is following this legislation closely. Now, the judicial pay raise is contingent on a separate piece of legislation passing, and it may or may not happen. We'll see.
Well, we are at the beginning of a process.
Yeah.
Do you want to just quickly run through that process? The Senate is holding hearings. They will eventually produce a bill of their own and vote on it. Likewise, the House.
Yeah, well, the House, so I guess there's two trains running. I should tell you that every legislative session or cycle, they decide, hey, is it going to be a Senate bill or is it going to be House bill? This time it's a Senate bill. And so the general appropriations bill for the 26-27 biennium will be SB1. Okay,
Right.
I can tell you that.
They take turns, right?
They take
Ever
turns back and
since-
forth. So right now the Senate is ahead of the game. I mean, they got out of the gate early. House is still waiting for committee announcements and appointments. Anyway, so from there, each of them are going to go through the process. So Senate Finance Committee is having its hearings now. At some point, Chair Huffman will appoint work group leads to deal with different parts of the budget. Somebody will be working on natural resource issues. Other people will be working on health and human services. They'll come back. They'll provide some recommendations based on what's in that baseline bill and what's not in the baseline bill. They'll come back and say, hey, these are the things we want to add, or these are the things we want to move around. They will do that. They'll probably have a bill that they approve, that they mark up and approve by probably Easter. They will have their version of that Senate bill, their final version of the Senate bill done. It'll probably go to the floor around Easter. On the House side, it's probably a little more, there's few more steps involved. The House they'll hear overviews, they'll hear from the state agencies about what's in the bill that the agencies like and what else they want in the bill. The House will set up its own kind of subcommittees who will look at each of these groups of agencies or different issues, come up with their recommendations, present those to the full committee, and the full committee will, enact those changes. The full bill for the House will go to the bill will go to the House floor, where there is an amendment process. Typically, on the Senate side that doesn't happen, but on the House side, it's a little more open-ended or whatever you want to call it, where they basically have these amendments to the floor amendments where people can make efforts to maybe to go for the programs that they think are most important, to provide additional funding increases, to provide contingent appropriations based on legislation they hope will pass. Anyway, typically there's some rules around this floor amendment process. And those rules are you can't add put and take. You can't add something in unless you can pay for it. And let's say you want to add money for a forensic unit in Brazos County, and I'm just throwing out Brazos County as an example. You want to provide some funding for that, a one-time grant for that. Well, and you want to provide $2 million. Well, in order to do that, you'd have to basically find $2 million in general revenue someplace else in the budget. So that floor amendment process could be very exciting. And but once that's done, once the House adopts its budget, what they'll do is they'll appoint the Lieutenant Governor Patrick, and Speaker Burrows will appoint a conference committee, and they will hash it out.
The House and Senate will hash out their differences.
They sure will, and it happens as it happens every budget cycle, and they have to get it done, and they do get it done.
Yeah.
It's
and this is the only thing, I think most people know this by now, but this is a budget is the only thing the legislature has to pass.
absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
That they're
right.
constitutionally required to pass.
They can't
A balanced budget.
a balanced budget. That's right. And once that happens, once they pass a budget, the governor can go through his veto process.
He has a deadline.
He has a deadline as well. The other thing that happens, that has to happen, is of course the controller has to certify that there's sufficient revenue to cover what's been appropriated. And what he's looking at is, again, just that funding flavor that has to do with taxes and general revenue. That's what he's really looking at in terms of, he's comparing the spending to what is normally called available revenue. There are some caps on how much you can spend in available revenue without triggering a 2/3 vote in some cases. But I think maybe that's a discussion for another day.
We are, like I said, we're at the beginning of this process. It's going to continue until the end of session. And I will provide on our show description page on county.org any relevant links
Yes.
to our discussion, including Zelma's recent article and our worksheet. We have a worksheet on the Senate budget, the House and Senate baseline budgets. I will put a link on our show page to that. Zelma will be providing regular updates in
Yes,
our
I will.
weekly newsletter, County Issues. You can find County Issues on county.org under the Legislative Services tab. And I think that will do us for this introductory look at the budget. Zelma, is there anything else we should know before we sign off?
I don't think so. I don't think so, Jody. Maybe one of these days we should do a glossary. A glossary of terms. I think people. We want to share this information with y'all, but we certainly want to present it in a way that just focuses on the things that we think are most relevant to y'all.
Well, I'm sure, as we've done in the past, when we're all said and done, in a county magazine, I'm sure you will have an article explaining
The whole thing.
Well, thank you, Zelma. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jody.
And thank you for listening to Texas County Voice. We'll see you next time.